Today, we're going to have a really tough one. So for the first time on the channel, I have to warn you that if you are susceptible to all kinds of tragedies and react strongly to them, it's better not to watch this video. For anyone else who decides to stick around, I'm happy to welcome you to my channel, where from time to time, I talk about real-life crimes and strange phenomena. If you like that sort of thing, then subscribe and let's get started. The Japanese have long been known for their dedication to work. The term kurushi was introduced in Japan in the 70s to describe deaths caused by exhaustion from overwork. I think you've heard of it. Managers force employees to perform tasks beyond their responsibilities and encourage them to come to work early while leaving work on time is frowned upon. When deadlines are looming, sleeping on the job is a fairly common practice. Despite the negative impact on society and the collective mental health of the Japanese workforce, this unhealthy tradition persists to this day. It's sometimes said that bad experiences are also experiences because you analyze your mistakes and move on keeping what you've learned in your head. But some mistakes are so devastating that you are left to watch in horror as everything slowly crumbles. In 1999, a combination of negligence, corporate greed, and a complete disregard for worker safety led to the simply unimaginable suffering of one man. On the morning of September 31,999, nuclear power plant technician Hisashi Aochi, his colleague Masata Shinohara, and their supervisor Yutaka arrived at the Tokaimura nuclear power plant. It was their regular workday. I am neither a chemist nor a physicist, but I will tell it as I understood it. One of the units at this plant was needed to process uranium, and it was already being processed into fuel rods that were then used in other nuclear plants and reactors. There were no specially trained personnel for this role, and it was performed by those technicians who were available at the time. Procedure was strictly scheduled from which tank to pour what and how long to mix it all. And 3 years before that, the company had changed the official procedure so that uranium nitride solution could be prepared in stainless steel buckets by hand instead of putting the ingredients in a special tank for dissolution. This was illegal to say the least, and contrary to government regulations, but it never caused any accidents because the uranium concentration was always extremely low. When the 3 workers arrived at the plant that day, they were already 2 days behind schedule in delivering nuclear fuel rod. The company pressured the employees to complete the procedure as quickly as possible, so the technicians themselves changed the procedure even more. They now mixed uranium nitride solution in buckets and manually poured it directly into the sludge tank. In addition, they used a concentration of uranium 7 times greater than what they had before to create the fuel as quickly as possible. And as you can imagine, that's what led to the tragic consequences. At about 10:35 a.m., Ochi and Shinohara were mixing uranium powder in buckets, but they used 7 times the allowable concentration. Aochi was leaning on a sediment tank and assisting Shinohara, who was standing on a platform pouring the mixture, and suddenly the radiation gamma alarm went off. Uchi, Shinohara, and Yutakawa realized they had made a terrible mistake. All 3 reportedly saw a flash of blue light. This is the so-called Vavilov-Cherenkov effect, the amount of energy and a shockwave similar to the sonic boom of supersonic airplanes or bullets, confirming that an uncontrolled nuclear fission chain reaction had occurred that irradiated the room with deadly doses of gamma particles. Ochi, who was closest to the explosion, received the highest dose of gamma particles. Shinohara, who was standing next to him, received a slightly lower dose. Yokokawa, who was sitting at a computer a few meters away from them, received the lowest dose of radiation, so you understand that the internationally recognized radiation safety limit for one person per year is 20 millisieverts of radiation per year. Aochi received at one point 17,000 millisieverts of radiation, which is 3 times the lethal dose. Shinohara received 10,000 millisieverts, and Yokokawa 3,000 millisieverts. The 3 men immediately rushed to escape, but did not get far. Aochi and Shinohara immediately felt a searing pain all over their bodies. They began to vomit. Yokokawa also felt the effect, although not as strong. Ochi went into the locker room where he vomited and collapsed on the floor, and the plant was immediately evacuated to repair the damage and prevent Aochi from exposing other workers. Shinohara and Yokokawa were taken to the National Institute of Radiological Sciences in Chiba. However, due to the severity of Uchi's condition, he was quickly sent to Tokyo University Hospital, which has more qualified staff and modern treatment equipment. On the evening of September 30, Aochi arrived at the University of Tokyo Hospital. At the hospital, he was brought on a stretcher and taken to a private room in the intensive care unit where he was looked after by one of the nurses. She noted that apart from a swollen arm and what appeared to be freshly burned skin, the man looked well, was alert. One of the nurses even said that she thought he could have gone home that day without realizing it, which started one of the most horrific deaths in history. The doctors realized that Aochi's case was not an ordinary one. There are countless cells in the human body that die, but are eventually replaced by new ones. This is due to the chromosomes in our body, which are designed to repair themselves if the chromosomes do not function. Man simply cannot survive, and Aochi's chromosomes were so badly damaged by the radiation blast that their samples looked like soup, some of them shattered into pieces, like glass flying in different directions, and were hard to identify. Some of them were abnormally spliced blueprints for replication. There was simply no more cell regeneration, and the chromosomes had become useless. The doctors simply couldn't believe what they were seeing. If the damage was so severe, why did the nurses say that Aochi looked healthy and in high spirits? Well, the doctors agreed that the man was in the ghost stage, a period of health that can last for hours or days, depending on the body's response to radiation poisoning. Before the explosion, Hisashi's cells were still functional, so all the health he was showing when he arrived at the hospital was short-lived. Once the radiation poisoning made itself felt, everything would change. Simply put, he was a time bomb, and his nightmarish suffering was about to begin. In addition to the loss of chromosome functionality, the white blood cell count in the man's blood was dangerously low, making him susceptible to infection and disease. To remedy the situation, the chief medical officer in charge of the case, Dr. Kazuhiko Maekawa, ordered that he be moved to a sterile ward where he would be permanently protected from outside pathogens and bacteria. Having eliminated the possibility of infections, Dr. Maekawa realized that in order to give him a chance at survival, it was necessary to provide his body with an influx of healthy chromosomes, which would cause it to reproduce cells and repair itself. He then decided to try an experimental cancer treatment called hematopoietic stem cell transplantation. This would involve taking healthy bone marrow cells from a donor, which would then be transplanted into Uchi. The healthy cells will go into his bone marrow and ideally allow him to produce his own healthy cells again. The only caveat to this then cutting-edge treatment method was that the donor had to be an immune system match. Fortunately, Hisashi had a sister who was deemed a match by doctors, and the surgery was performed. The family was concerned that Aochi was the first patient in the world to receive this treatment. Well aware of the damage the radiation had done to his body, Dr. Maekawa made sure that the family could see him daily. He realized that any false hope would make an already difficult situation even more problematic, so he wanted his family to see the changes and accept the worst-case scenario now. Meanwhile, the man didn't seem to realize the seriousness of his situation. One of the nurses remarked that he once asked, "I thought I could leave the hospital in a month or so, but it's taking longer, isn't it?" Later, he asked about his radiation exposure. When you're exposed to that kind of radiation, is there a risk of getting leukemia? Or something else? What Ouchie didn't know was that he simply didn't have enough time for leukemia to develop. As time went on, the physical symptoms of radiation poisoning began to arrive. Losing elasticity. Ooh. The paramedics noticed that removing the medical tape from his body was peeling off large chunks of skin, so they stopped using it and stopped putting anything on his body at all. Later, his lungs began to fill with fluid, and he began to breathe with difficulty. At this point, it was already hard for him to move or even talk. However, his spirit seemed indestructible. He was still smiling and saying to his wife, "I love you," which the nurses said was very touching. Soon as fluid began to build up in his lung, Ouchie finally lost his ability to breathe. That's when doctors decided to put him on CPR. An endoscopy was also performed, and it was found that the intestinal membrane had died and was peeling away from the walls of the intestine. The human intestine is viscous with mucous membrane, a surface that is very important for absorption, digestion, and even defense against microbial infections. Without it, a person can neither retain nutrients from food nor absorb water. Eventually, this loss of fluid and nutrients can lead to dehydration or starvation, and eventually death. But as it turned out, death would be far preferable to what Ouchie was about to endure over the next few days. To find out what went wrong, Dr. Miyakawa ran another test. He found out that the healthy chromosomes he had been transplanted with were now tainted due to the radiation in his body. Despite his best efforts, his body was too damaged by the radiation blast, and even the healthy cells he had transplanted were affected. This meant that Ouchie was back to square one. Dr. Miyakawa was distraught as he realized he had to break this terrible news to his now abandoned family. In the meantime, Ouchie began having GI problems. He was losing control of his bowels and had diarrhea around the clock. In addition, a detached intestinal membrane was causing him to bleed internally. He was losing a lot of blood rapidly, and this forced Dr. Miyakawa to give him transfusions, sometimes even several times a day. Under these conditions, he was constantly injected with fentanyl to ease the pain, but his skin and flesh continued to blister and peel off, causing his body to no longer be able to retain fluids, and he was in danger of becoming completely dehydrated. The man was reportedly losing 8 to 10 liters of fluid per day, which had to be replenished through an IV. In an attempt to preserve the remaining layers of skin, medical staff wrapped almost his entire body in medical gauze, hoping that this would hold the skin in place and help him retain fluid. But it didn't work. The bandages were completely soaked with blood after only a few hours. The fluid loss was so severe that doctors had to measure the amount of fluid to know how much to pump back in. At that point, Ouchie was already hopeless. A nurse recorded him saying, "No more. I'm going home. Please stop." In a state of delirium, Ouchie reportedly called out for his mother. Because his skin had lost elasticity, his eyelids could no longer close, and he was reportedly crying blood. Because of the severe pain, he was given large doses of different substances to help him sleep and ease the pain. Dr. Miyakawa spoke to Ouchie's family and informed them that his condition was unlikely to improve and would likely get worse. The family asked him to do everything he could to save Ouchie's life, The only thing he could try was a massive lab-grown skin graft. Dr. Miyakawa hoped that if the skin took root, it would help retain fluid and buy time to find other ways to help him. Unfortunately, due to the tremendous amount of fluid lost through the exposed areas of his body, the skin did not take root and quickly fell off. It has now been 2 months since Aochi was admitted to the hospital. He has had multiple blood transfusions, skin grafts, and stem cell transplant. He was breathing with CP. His skin had rotted, his eyes couldn't close even when he slept because he had no eyelids. His intestines were bleeding, and he was in constant searing pain, but he was alive. Massive blood loss and constant blood transfusions had a secondary effect. Aochi's heart was beating at a tremendous rate, as if he were running a marathon. The strain on the heart muscle was catastrophic, and then it stopped. The paramedics had no orders. No, resuscitate. So they were simply obliged to do everything possible to bring him back to life. They quickly massaged his heart, and it started beating again, but then quickly stopped. The team injected him with cardiotonic drugs, and after stopping and restarting him 3 times, his heart returned to a steady but very fast beat. The stopping and restarting of his heart took a toll on Aochi's brain. His overall organ function began to decline. When his family visited him, he didn't even recognize them, and hardly understood anything at all. By then, his survival depended entirely on medical equipment. Aochi's immune cells became abnormal and attacked his remaining healthy white blood cells. In a short period of time, he had none left at all, and even a common cold could kill him in a matter of hours. On the 81st night after the man was admitted to the hospital, Dr. Miyakawa gathered the family and informed them that Hisashi Aochi could not be saved, and that if his heart stopped again, he should not be revived. The family agreed and signed an order prohibiting resuscitation in hopes of putting him out of further suffering. And so, on the 83rd day of this horror, Hisashi Aochi's heart stopped, and he passed away. It is hard to know exactly who is to blame for this story. Of course, the main blame lies with the factory where Aochi worked. But should we blame the doctors who used every means to try to save him or his family, who dreamed of his recovery and clung to every opportunity? I don't know. All I know is that no one deserves this, and the more people know about it, the less it will happen in the future. And let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you all for watching.